A racist cop steals a black boy's gold chain, but 15 minutes later, the boy's FBI agent father does the unthinkable. Trey Johnson's heart was still racing as he hurried home, his basketball forgotten under his arm. The memory of Officer Bradley Connor's sneer and the tug of the chain being ripped from his neck played on a loop in his mind. That chain wasn't just a shiny piece of metal. It was the last gift his grandfather had given him before passing away. And now, it was gone, taken by a man who wore a badge but acted like a bully. Trey's neighborhood wasn't unfamiliar with incidents like this. Officer Connors had earned a reputation in the area for targeting young black boys, his actions always just on the edge of legal, but undeniably rooted in bias. Most families knew to avoid him when he prowled the streets in his cruiser, but Trey never thought he'd have to deal with him up close. As he neared his house, Trey tried to steady his breathing. He didn't want his mom to see how shaken he was. She worried enough about him, constantly reminding him to be cautious, respectful, and alert whenever he left the house. Her words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, stay smart, Trey. Not everyone out there has good intentions. Asterisk. Pushing open the front door, Trey was greeted by the smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. He bypassed the aroma, heading straight to his room and closing the door behind him. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his phone, unsure if he should call his dad. Marcus Johnson, a senior FBI agent, was always busy, often traveling or tied up in high-stakes cases. But this wasn't something Trey could keep to himself. With shaking hands, Trey dialed his father's number. It rang twice before Marcus answered, his familiar steady voice bringing a small sense of relief.
"Trey, everything okay?"
Marcus asked, picking up on the tension in his son's breathing. Trey hesitated before spilling the story, recounting every detail, from the basketball court to the moment Officer Connor had driven away with his chain. His voice cracked as he described the humiliation of being accused of theft and the anger of having something so personal taken from him. Marcus listened in silence, but Trey could hear the shift in his father's tone. When he finally spoke, his usual calm was replaced by a sharp, calculated edge.
"Did you get his badge number? The license plate of the cruiser?"
Marcus asked.
I think so,"
Trey stammered, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his backpack where he had scribbled the details before heading home.
"I wrote them down." "Good job,"
Marcus said, his voice firm.
"Now listen to me carefully. Go straight to your room and stay there.
Don't talk to anyone else about this. I'll take care of it."
Trey nodded, even though his father couldn't see him.
"Okay, Dad."
After hanging up, Trey sat on his bed, his hands still trembling. He trusted his father, but the fear and anger swirling inside him made it hard to calm down. The chain wasn't just about material value.
It was about the pride he felt every time he wore it, a reminder of his grandfather's words, "Carry yourself with strength, no matter what." Meanwhile, Marcus was already moving. At his office, he pulled up a secure database and began searching for every detail on Officer Bradley Connor. Within minutes, he had a file in front of him that painted a damning picture: multiple complaints of misconduct, accusations of racial profiling, and a disciplinary record that was suspiciously light given the number of incidents. Marcus clenched his jaw. He had seen men like Connors before, officers who used their authority to intimidate rather than protect, men who hid behind their badges to perpetuate their biases. But what Connor didn't know was that he had messed with the wrong family. Marcus wasn't just going to get Trey's chain back. He was going to make sure Connor faced the consequences of his actions. At home, Trey sat by his window, watching the darkening sky and wondering what his dad was planning. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since the encounter, a small spark of hope began to replace the knot of fear in his chest. Marcus Johnson's SUV roared to life as he pulled out of the driveway, the tires kicking up a trail of gravel. His face was a mask of grim determination, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. His FBI badge rested on the passenger seat, a stark reminder of the authority he wielded and the responsibility he bore, not just as an agent, but as a father. The file he'd reviewed minutes earlier had painted a damning portrait of Officer Bradley Connor. Marcus had seen officers like him before, men who preyed on the vulnerable under the guise of upholding the law. But this time, it wasn't just anyone. This time, it was his son. Within minutes, Marcus was parked outside the city's precinct, the nondescript brick building bustling with activity. He exited the SUV, adjusted his suit jacket, and strode through the front doors. Inside, the sound of phones ringing and officers chatting filled the air, but all noise seemed to fade as Marcus walked in, exuding authority.
"I need to speak to Officer Bradley Connor. Now!"
Marcus said to the desk sergeant, his tone leaving no room for argument. The sergeant looked up, startled by Marcus's presence.
"And you are?"
he asked, his gaze flickering to the badge Marcus flashed with practiced precision.
"Agent Marcus Johnson, FBI."
Marcus replied, his voice steady and cold. Marcus's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge.
"This isn't a request."
The sergeant nodded quickly, picking up the phone and mumbling something into the receiver. A few moments later, Connor appeared, his confident stride faltering slightly, when he saw Marcus standing there, arms crossed and eyes blazing with barely contained fury.
"You wanted to see me?"
Connor asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but his voice betrayed a hint of unease. Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them.
"I'm here about my son, Trey Johnson,"
he said, his voice low but razor-sharp.
"You stopped him today, accused him of theft, and stole his gold chain. Care to explain yourself?"
Connor's smirk returned, though it was weaker than before.
"Oh, that kid?" He looked suspicious. "Probably stolen goods, so I confiscated it." "Suspicious?"
Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly.
"You mean a black boy walking home from the basketball court? That's what you found suspicious."
Connor bristled, his defensive posture betraying his nerves.
"I was doing my job,"
he said, avoiding Marcus's piercing gaze.
"If he wants his chain back, he can come to the station and prove it's his."
Marcus took a step closer, forcing Connor to meet his eyes.
"No, he won't, because I know exactly what this is, Connor. It's not about the chain, and it's not about doing your job. It's about you abusing your badge to harass a kid who did nothing wrong."
Connor scoffed, but Marcus didn't give him a chance to respond.
"You think you're untouchable because you've been getting away with this for years,"
Marcus continued, his voice cutting through the room like a blade.
"But you've made a mistake this time. You picked the wrong family."
The room had grown quieter, officers and staff subtly glancing toward the confrontation. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, slapping it onto the nearest desk. Inside were records of every complaint filed against Connor, each one ignored, dismissed, or buried.
"This,"
Marcus said, tapping the file,
"is a pattern, a history of misconduct, racism, and abuse of power. And now, thanks to what you did to my son, I'm going to make sure every single one of these comes to light."
Connor paled, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Marcus's words.
"You can't do that,"
he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper.
"Oh, I can. And I will.
Starting with internal affairs, then the press. By the time I'm done, everyone from your captain to the mayor will know exactly who you are."
Connor opened his mouth to retort, but Marcus cut him off.
"Now, you're going to give me my son's chain back, and then you're going to sit down with your superiors and explain why you should keep your badge. Spoiler alert, you won't."
The tension in the room was palpable as Connor fumbled in his pocket and produced the gold chain, handing it over with trembling hands. Marcus took it, his expression hard as stone.
Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out of the precinct, the chain clutched tightly in his hand. Back in his SUV, Marcus took a deep breath before dialing his supervisor.
"This needs to escalate,"
he said simply.
"We're opening an investigation into Officer Bradley Connor and the entire precinct."
Hanging up, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The fight wasn't over, but he had taken the first step. Connor had underestimated Marcus and his resolve. Now, it was time to ensure no other child would experience what Trey had endured. Marcus walked into the precinct with the aura of a storm ready to break. The receptionist barely managed to ask for his purpose before Marcus's FBI badge was on the counter, its gold emblem gleaming under the fluorescent lights.
"I need Officer Bradley Connor here now,"
Marcus said, his tone sharp and unwavering. The desk sergeant, an older man with a thinning hairline, hesitated.
"Officer Connor is out on patrol,"
he said, shifting nervously under Marcus's glare.
"Call him back,"
Marcus ordered.
"Tell him it's urgent and federal. I'm not leaving until I speak to him."
The sergeant nodded quickly, fumbling for the phone. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the precinct grew tense as officers exchanged glances, whispering about the man whose calm demeanor belied the storm brewing behind his sharp eyes. 15 minutes later, Officer Bradley Connor strolled into the precinct, his uniform slightly rumpled and his expression smug, as though he'd already sized up the situation and dismissed it as nothing serious. That smugness faltered the moment his eyes landed on Marcus, who stood near a desk, arms folded and gaze piercing.
"You must be the boy's dad,"
Connor said, his voice dripping with fake nonchalance.
"Look, if this is about the chain, don't even start."
Marcus cut him off, stepping forward until there was barely a foot of space between them. His voice was low, measured, and dangerous.
"You stole from my son. You humiliated him. You threatened him. And now, you're going to make it right."
Connor smirked, though his eyes betrayed his unease.
"Stolen property gets confiscated. Maybe you should teach your kid not to flash around things that don't belong to him."
Before Connor could finish the sentence, Marcus dropped a thick manila folder onto the desk beside him with a loud thud. Papers spilled out, each one marked with dates, details, and damning accusations against Connor.
"This is your record,"
Marcus said, his voice sharp enough to cut steel.
"Every complaint.
Every misconduct report.
Every time you thought you could abuse your badge and get away with it." The smirk on Connor's face evaporated, replaced by a mix of anger and panic.
"You've got nothing,"
he spat.
"None of those stuck, and you know it."
Marcus leaned in, his face mere inches from Connor's, and his voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout.
"None of them stuck because you got lucky. That luck just ran out. I've already contacted Internal Affairs. As of tomorrow morning, you'll be under investigation."
By now, the desk sergeant and a few other officers had gathered around, their expressions ranging from curious to uncomfortable. Marcus didn't seem to notice or care. He kept his eyes locked on Connor, who shifted on his feet like a trapped animal.
"This is harassment,"
Connor said weakly, but the bravado in his voice was gone.
Marcus straightened, towering over the smaller man.
"No, this is accountability, something you've avoided for far too long."
The sergeant cleared his throat, stepping forward cautiously.
"Agent Johnson, I understand you're upset, but is there anything we can do to de-escalate the situation?"
Marcus turned to the sergeant, his voice icy.
"You can start by making him give back what he stole from my son."
All eyes turned to Connor, whose face turned a shade paler. He fumbled in his pocket, producing the gold chain with shaking hands. He held it out begrudgingly, his lips curling into a sneer.
"Here, take it."
Marcus took the chain, inspecting it briefly before slipping it into the pocket of his suit jacket. He stepped back, his gaze still locked on Connor.
"You're going to hear from Internal Affairs soon,"
Marcus said.
"And if you think for 1 second that I'll stop at this precinct, you're wrong."
"I'll take this to the mayor, to the press, to anyone who will listen. I'm going to make sure you never wear that badge again."
The precinct was silent as Marcus turned and walked out, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Once outside, he stood by his SUV for a moment, taking a deep breath. He glanced at the gold chain in his hand, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. He thought of Trey's face when he described the humiliation and fear he felt, and a fresh wave of determination coursed through him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.
By morning, the precinct was in chaos. News of Officer Connor's actions had not only spread within the department, but had also reached local media outlets. Clips of Marcus entering the precinct, paired with Trey's account of the stolen chain, quickly gained traction online. The footage from Connor's dashcam, retrieved as part of Marcus's formal complaint, left no doubt about what had transpired. The camera had captured every sneer, every unjustified accusation, and the moment Connor yanked the chain from Trey's neck. Internal Affairs moved swiftly. Connor was called into an emergency meeting and informed of his immediate suspension without pay, pending a full investigation. The weight of his misconduct, backed by undeniable evidence, was too heavy for even his closest allies in the department to ignore. But for Marcus, suspension wasn't enough. As he sat in his home office reviewing the evidence and drafting a statement, his resolve only deepened. This wasn't just about Trey. It was about ensuring no other child in their community had to endure what his son had faced. Marcus reached out to community leaders, local activists, and legal experts, organizing a town hall meeting that same week. The event, held at the local community center, was packed. Parents, teachers, and young people filled the room, many sharing similar stories of mistreatment and fear when dealing with certain officers. Trey, initially hesitant, stood beside his father as Marcus addressed the crowd.
"Yesterday, my son was humiliated and robbed by someone who was supposed to protect him,"
Marcus began, his voice steady but powerful.
"This isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that allows people like him to operate without accountability. That stops now."
The room erupted in applause, inspired by Marcus's determination. Attendees formed committees to petition the city council for reform. Marcus worked tirelessly with them, drafting proposals for mandatory bias training, the establishment of an independent civilian review board, and stricter oversight for officers with a history of complaints. Meanwhile, Connor's life began to unravel. With his suspension publicized and mounting pressure from the community, his name became synonymous with corruption and abuse. His attempts to dismiss the incident as a misunderstanding fell flat when the department's leadership, fearing backlash, publicly condemned his actions. Weeks later, the investigation concluded. Connor was formally fired and charged with theft and misconduct. During the hearing, Marcus and Trey both testified, their composed yet emotional accounts leaving a lasting impression on the courtroom. The judge handed down a sentence that ensured Connor would never wear a badge again. The fallout from the incident sparked a wave of change in the community. Marcus's town hall proposals gained traction, leading to the city council approving the formation of the Civilian Review Board. Slowly but surely, the community began to heal, knowing that one man's determination had made a difference. For Trey, the gold chain was returned, but the legacy of his father's fight for justice would last far longer. Police officers were required to attend regular sensitivity and bias training, and a whistleblower program was established to encourage accountability from within the force. For Trey, the events were transformative. One evening, As he sat on the porch with his father, the gold chain glinting under the porch light, he said quietly,
"I didn't think anything good could come from what happened."
Marcus turned to him, a soft smile on his face.
"Sometimes the hardest fights lead to the biggest changes. You showed strength, Trey. You didn't back down, and that matters."
The chain around Trey's neck took on a new meaning. It wasn't just a gift from his grandfather. It was now a symbol of resilience, of standing up against injustice, and of the bond between father and son that no one could break. Months turned into years, and the community continued to evolve. Trey, inspired by his father's actions, began speaking at youth events, encouraging other kids to stand up for themselves and know their worth. Marcus, though back to his demanding job at the FBI, made time to mentor local leaders, ensuring the changes they had fought for were upheld. One day, as Trey prepared for his high school graduation, he adjusted the chain around his neck and looked at his father.
"This isn't just a reminder of Grandpa anymore,"
Trey said.
"It's a reminder of everything we fought for."
Marcus nodded, pride shining in his eyes.
"And a reminder that we don't stop fighting."
The incident, though born from cruelty and abuse, became a catalyst for transformation. It brought a community together, exposed a corrupt officer, and strengthened the bond between a father and son who refused to let injustice have the final word. Disclaimer asterisk: the story you just read is fictional, created to highlight the importance of justice, equality, and accountability in law enforcement. Its purpose is to raise awareness and inspire empathy in our daily lives.